The party is over and you are finally alone, but your mind is louder than the music was. You begin to replay the last 3 hours of conversation, like a film editor looking for a mistake. Cognitive psychology calls this process rumination, a repetitive and passive focus on past social interactions. For many, this isn't just a brief reflection. It is an exhausting search for hidden meanings. You wonder if your joke was offensive, or if that brief silence meant they were bored. Overthinking is essentially a survival mechanism designed to protect us from social rejection. By analyzing every word, your brain tries to solve the puzzle of how others perceive you. But social life is rarely a logic puzzle, and this constant scrutiny leads to deep mental fatigue. Research suggests that this habit often stems from a mix of anxiety and high empathy. In this video, we will profile 12 specific patterns that define the mind of a social overthinker. 1. The spotlight effect is a cognitive bias where we believe our actions are center stage. Psychology shows that most people overestimate how much others notice their minor social slip-ups. You might fixate on a stuttered word, believing it changed the entire group's opinion of you. In reality, research suggests that peers are usually preoccupied with their own internal thoughts and anxieties. 2. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria describes an extreme emotional response to perceived criticism or failure. For the overthinker, a neutral response from a friend can feel like a devastating personal attack. This pattern creates a cycle where you scan every sentence for signs of disapproval or distance. Cognitive psychology suggests this hypersensitivity is often a learned defense mechanism against past social trauma. The consequence is a constant state of high alert that makes genuine connection feel dangerous. 3. Rejection sensitivity causes the brain to perceive neutral social signals as active threats. Psychology shows that some individuals experience a physical surge of pain when they feel slighted. This pattern often involves scanning a simple text message for a missing emoji or a period. Research suggests that the overthinker's brain treats a delayed reply as a sign of impending abandonment. This is often linked to rejection sensitivity dysphoria, where feelings are intense and difficult to regulate. Because they anticipate rejection, they may preemptively withdraw to protect their own dignity. The consequence is a tragic irony. The fear of losing people often causes the distance they fear. They spend hours deconstructing a 3-minute chat, looking for the moment things went wrong. This exhausting vigilance prevents them from actually enjoying the connection in the present moment. 4. Hyper-vigilance involves an intense, almost involuntary focus on nonverbal micro-cues during a conversation. Psychology shows that overthinkers don't just hear your words, they track your pupil dilation and posture. They look for a slight shift in tone or a half-second delay in your response. Research suggests this pattern often develops as a survival strategy to predict a parent or peer's mood. By reading these cues, the brain attempts to maintain safety by staying one step ahead of conflict. However, this results in overinterpretation, where a simple itch is misread as a sign of annoyance. The real-life consequence is that the overthinker is never truly present in the exchange. They are too busy being a detective to simply be a friend. This leads to a paradox where they have the most data, but the least amount of authentic connection. 5. Psychology identifies a trait called the need for cognitive closure, which is the desire for an answer on any given topic. For the overthinker, ambiguity in a conversation is emotionally intolerable. When someone gives a vague response like maybe or we'll see, it leaves a cognitive gap. Research suggests that the brain hates unfinished social narratives and will work overtime to complete them. Because of a built-in negativity bias, the mind usually fills these blanks with the worst-case scenario. You might assume, "I'll let you know" actually means I'm looking for an excuse to say no. The consequence is that you stop reacting to what was actually said. Instead, you begin reacting to the imaginary, negative story you have written for the other person. This creates unnecessary conflict and deepens the sense of social isolation. 6. Conversational scripting is the habit of mentally rehearsing dialogue before a social event occurs. Psychology shows that overthinkers create internal branching paths for every possible thing someone might say. This pattern is a defensive attempt to eliminate the risk of being caught off guard or sounding foolish. Research suggests this pre-thinking places a massive cognitive load on the brain before the interaction even begins. By the time you actually start talking, you are already mentally exhausted from the internal simulation. The psychological irony is that scripting makes you appear less natural and more robotic. If the other person deviates from your mental script, you may freeze or experience a spike in panic. The real-life consequence is a lack of spontaneity, which is essential for building genuine rapport. You are following a plan, rather than connecting with the living person standing in front of you. 7. Cognitive psychology calls this all-or-nothing thinking, a distortion where nuances are completely ignored. In this pattern, a conversation is either a perfect success or a total disaster. You might have shared an hour of great connection and laughter with a friend. However, if you stumbled over one sentence at the very end, that becomes the only memory. Psychology shows that overthinkers tend to filter out the positive data of an encounter. They focus exclusively on the one awkward moment until it defines the entire experience. Research suggests this occurs because the brain prioritizes perceived threats to our social standing. The consequence is a persistent feeling of social incompetence, regardless of the actual evidence. This distortion robs you of the satisfaction that comes from healthy, albeit imperfect, human interactions. 8. Cognitive psychology identifies a pattern called emotional reasoning, where we use our feelings as evidence for reality. If you feel awkward during a conversation, you conclude that the interaction itself must objectively be awkward. Research suggests this happens because the brain struggles to distinguish between internal sensations and external facts. You might feel a flush of shame and assume it means everyone in the room is judging you. Psychology shows that your internal state is often a poor reflection of how others actually perceive you. While you feel like a social failure, the person you're talking to might find you charming. The consequence of emotional reasoning is that you act on feelings rather than social cues. You may end a conversation abruptly because your internal discomfort feels like an emergency. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where your own escape makes the interaction actually become uncomfortable. 9. Social psychology describes the false consensus effect as a bias where we project our own thoughts onto others. When you are highly self-critical, you assume that everyone else is analyzing you with that same harshness. Research suggests that overthinkers believe their internal monologue is a public broadcast. If you are fixated on a small mistake, you believe the entire room is fixated on it too. In reality, psychology shows that most people are far more concerned with their own performance than yours. This cognitive error creates a feeling of being constantly under surveillance by an invisible jury. The consequence is an inability to relax, as you feel you must perform for a judgmental audience. You stop being a participant in the conversation and become a defendant in a trial that isn't happening. By projecting your self-doubt onto others, you build walls that prevent genuine, low-pressure belonging. 10. Psychology identifies a secondary layer of cognitive distress known as meta-overthinking. Research suggests this occurs when you begin to ruminate on the fact that you are ruminating. You might realize you are being quiet in a group and start worrying that your silence looks suspicious. Cognitive psychology calls this a feedback loop, where the anxiety about the habit fuels the habit itself. Instead of focusing on the person talking, you are busy judging your own mental performance. You ask yourself why you can't just be normal, or why you can't stop analyzing every word. This pattern creates a profound sense of exhaustion because your brain is running two intense programs at once. The real-life consequence is a total withdrawal from the social environment as the internal noise becomes deafening. By overthinking the overthinking, you move further away from the very safety you are trying to build. 11. Cognitive psychology identifies social perfectionism as the belief that others only accept us if we are flawless. For the overthinker, a conversation is not an exchange, but a performance that must be executed perfectly. Research suggests this stems from a fragile sense of self-worth that is highly dependent on external approval. Every stutter or awkward pause is viewed as a crack in your identity that others will surely judge. Psychology shows that this mindset treats social errors as evidence of being fundamentally unlovable. You stop seeing people as friends and start seeing them as critics whose scores determine your value. The consequence is a rigid, guarded personality that never feels safe enough to be authentic. True connection requires the vulnerability to be seen, including the messy and unscripted parts. By chasing perfection, the overthinker accidentally builds a barrier against the very belonging they crave. 12. The final pattern is the realization that your internal noise is not an objective reflection of reality. Psychology shows that overthinking is often a misguided attempt by the brain to keep us safe. By understanding these cognitive distortions, we can begin to detach from the urgency of our anxious thoughts. Research suggests that developing self-compassion is the most effective way to break the cycle of rumination. We must accept that social interactions are inherently messy and that perfection is an impossible standard. Most people are not scrutinizing your words because they are busy overthinking their own. The goal is not to stop thinking, but to stop believing every negative thought you have. As you practice staying present, the volume of the post-social hangover will naturally begin to fade. Remember, your value is not found in a flawless performance, but in the courage to show up.